Hey everyone, thank you for joining us for the next session of our Agentic DevOps live series. Before we start, I do have some quick housekeeping. Please take a moment to read our code of conduct. We seek to provide a respectful environment for both our audience and presenters. While we absolutely encourage engagement in the chat, we ask that you please be mindful of your commentary, remain professional, and on topic. Keep an eye on that chat. We'll be dropping helpful links and checking for questions for our hosts and presenters to answer. Our session is being recorded. It will be available to view on demand right here on the Reactor channel. With that, I'd love to turn it over to our experts for today. Thank you for joining.
All right. Thanks, Anna. Hey, everyone. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, depending on where you are joining us from. I'm Samit Javeri. I'm the Director of Product Marketing focused on AI-powered developer experience. And today I have with me two colleagues, Jenny and Carl, who are senior leaders in the One Engineering system. So, Carl, why don't we start with you? Could you introduce yourself and what are your role and responsibility?
Yeah, sure. Hello, everyone. So I lead a team of product managers that focuses on DevOps AI. And our mission is to make Microsoft developers more productive with AI.
And Jenny?
Sure. Hi, I'm Jenny. I'm an engineering manager leading an AI native engineering team at Microsoft. In my past career, I was a teacher for 14 years. So Microsoft, in a way, is my second career.
That's amazing, Jenny. Now I know why you are able to explain complex subjects, make them simple, and explain them so well. So, Carl, Jenny, like, how do you use AI in your daily workflows?
Yeah, a lot. So, like, personally, I started playing with neural networks as far back as 2004. And more recently, of course, I played with GitHub Copilot, like as soon as it was out. And then, like everyone, like I fell into Gen AI with GPT 3.5. It really became like a daily use for me. Initially, simple scenarios like boosting my productivity with meeting summaries, transcript, allowing me to not go to meetings, to the like many meetings we're invited all the time, by like ensuring that I can catch up and get all the details afterwards. So that brings me more focus. And you like, believe it or not, like even a simple scenario like that has done wonders for me. And then, of course, I use a lot Copilot for all my production, be it code, but also writing. And so I bounce ideas with Copilot, and you like try to refine my thinking, and then get a first draft, heavily edit, and then you like have it do the wordsmithing for me. For example, as a non-English native speaker, it's super useful. And in coding, I like use it constantly as well. And I'm sure we'll talk a lot more about that.
Absolutely. Yeah. Catching up on meetings using AI summary is my favorite use case. How about you, Jenny?
Well, when I started using AI, I found it incredibly frustrating, especially for coding tasks. I found it created more developer toil, not reducing it. And for me, the shift really happened when I stopped treating AI as a tool and started treating it as a thought partner, asking it for its perspective on how to approach a problem, not just telling it what to do. That really changed everything. And now I use AI everywhere and as much as possible, obviously for writing code and reviewing PRs, but also for reading a lot of documentation and condensing it into something that I can actually consume for research, for data analysis, pretty much anything and everything. I'm going to use AI first.
Yeah, no, those are all great use cases. And I know we at Microsoft use AI to ramp up and onboard quite a bit. All right. So why, from audience perspective, why you should learn from our experience, right? And it comes down to the sheer breadth of our experiences and the diversity of our code bases. So we have 160,000 active repos, and they span every gamut. Like, we have mission critical repos, we have some experimental, we cover every language and every architecture. So whether you're a Java developer, Node, Python, .NET, we got you covered. And we have repos which are cloud native, to repos which span several decades and are legacy. So whether you are an individual developer, whether you are a small startup, or whether you are a large enterprise with multiple business units across geographies, you can learn from our experience. So we are going to talk today about agentic AI and engineering at 3 different altitudes. We'll start with individual developer and dev productivity. We'll then move to how do you manage teams in this era of AI, and then finally, how do you scale your learnings, at enterprise level and get the ROI? So, Carl, why is it important to talk about all of these 3 levels?
Yeah, so we wanted to touch these 3 levels because we wanted to start from principles, right? Like if you look at how AI is discussed today, it's very often centered around the individual and their personal productivity. And to a certain extent, that's understandable because it all started with ChatGPT, at least like for the rollout of Gen AI, and conversational interfaces, which are by nature individual. And so a lot of the information and everything we see out there is based on that. But when you think about it, as part of an enterprise, you have to think about these 3 dimensions. So these 3 aspects are for the individual developer, how do we create the best environment for their personal productivity? Again, super discussed everywhere. But then we organize in teams, and teams have to discuss together about consistent approaches to AI, how they work together with that new set of colleagues, which are AI agents, and how do they experience them as a team, and how do they include them as part of the team. And then we also need to think about it in terms of the enterprise and how we can solve problems at the company scale. So we have to figure out what classes of problems really cover the entire enterprise and how we can centrally solve them. So it's really thinking in a principled way across these 3 dimensions that we wanted to share here.
I'll add, Carl's right that it starts with principles, but I want to add something. To solve enterprise level problems, you have to shift AI and agents out of the individual IDE. When AI lives only in your editor, you get individual productivity gains, but the hardest problems, compliance at scale, security debt across thousands of repositories, consistent patterns across teams, those don't live in one developer's IDE, they live in the organization. So we need to think about AI at all 3 levels. How does an individual get better? How does a team create shared context? And how do you deploy agents that work across the enterprise without a human in the loop for every decision?
Those are great points. And when we think of our Microsoft's journey, it is across those 3 waves. Jenny, you mentioned going beyond the IDE. Wave 1, like when ChatGPT came and GitHub Copilot came in the first place, it was all about inline code completion within the IDE. Wave 2 came when the Copilot was able to reason and plan, and we had agent mode, but the humans still remained in control. And wave 3 is where we now have truly asynchronous agents who are kind of peers. You can assign them tasks and they complete it and the PR is ready. So we are having true hybrid teams now with wave 3. And at Microsoft also, if you see, lot of across many of our large projects, Microsoft Aspire, Microsoft Agent Framework, one of the top contributors over the last few months has been the coding agent. So it's an agent which is a top contributor now. So let's start then with individual effectiveness of a developer and improving developer productivity. So Jenny, in this era of hybrid teams of developers and agents, how does an individual developer start?
Yeah, we're going to cover 3 foundations that determine whether AI helps or frustrates you. Managing trust, managing context, and managing memory. These sound simple, but most people skip them and then wonder why their AI interactions feel inconsistent or unreliable. Carl?
Yeah, and that inconsistency and the fact that sometimes they are unreliable is super important to keep in mind, because that early frustration is not a failure, right? Like it's part of the learning process. And so everybody like needs to go through that to understand like the reactions of the agents, whether it's like conversational, a business agent, or a coding agent, and get a feel of like what drives success. So like it's important to like make that journey and think about like these three aspects of like what developers need to experience.
That makes
Exactly. I was going to jump in. When Carl and I first met, I didn't know anything about him. And now I know why he speaks French, that his last name is Portuguese, and he's a really awesome volunteer firefighter. And we built that relationship. It's the same with AI. You really have to put in the time.
I too recently came to know that Carl is a volunteer firefighter. Yeah, I too came to know recently that Carl is a volunteer firefighter. So like, I have to now literally ask him, like when he says I'm fighting fires, I have to ask him whether that's literal or metaphorically you're speaking. So, but these are three great aspects. Let's start with managing trust. And we keep on hearing it, like, that AI at times hallucinates. So how can we judge the quality of code? How can we trust the output of an agent? And how do we assess the quality of that code?
Yeah. So personally, I'm convinced that trust is the central pivot for everything and for like working successfully with AI. And like it's not going to be binary, right? Like, or like I fully trust it or I don't trust it at all. It's going to be a spectrum. So the whole conversation is how do we build like trust along that spectrum? So like if you take an example from a simple conversation with like ChatGPT or a conversational LLM, when we started, right, we had to go and understand the limitations, and like good responses were not born all of a sudden. So we had to go through an initial set of prompting and failing and seeing a bunch of hallucinations, and we found ways to prompt correctly in order to get the outcomes we were looking for, so that like we could trust more the outcomes. And in software delivery, it's the same, but in a much more complex environment because we have many more dimensions. We have, in fact, to rethink the whole DevOps process in order to tackle each of these parts. So it starts with specs, right? We have to give good specs because the specs are the prompts, what we give as an input. We have to make sure that they are not too sparse and not too large, that like they kill the context window. Then the second aspect is like actually managing that context window optimally, so that the coding agent has like the right information, but also the space to think and to produce the right output. So it needs to go gather the right information about the repo, do the right searches, semantic search, have memory, like all the elements it needs in order to do a good job. And then like once the code is produced, we need to make sure that it passes all the right guardrails, security, the policies, the compliance, and all the tests like defined by the team, by the enterprise, etc. Once it's done that, like it also needs to be able to trigger a build, to potentially fix that build if it's broken. We need to make sure that it's able to deploy to a sandbox or to a canary environment in order to test what it just produced, right? Like, because if it produced a bunch of code that doesn't work, like that's not helpful. You're not going to trust it. And finally, creating good PRs, participating in the review of these PRs. So all that process, and we're mostly talking about inner loop here, is not a guarantee of like 100% success, and like you don't ever have to look at the code anymore, of course. But each of these things builds a little more trust in the output, right? Like if it can pass all of these aspects, it's already much better, and it's something that you can look at and trust more.
I'll add one thing. Trust isn't just about verification, it's also about relationship. When you create psychological safety for the AI to admit uncertainty, you get better results. And the research backs this up. OpenAI published a paper showing that when models aren't penalized for admitting mistakes, false negatives drop dramatically. The same principle that works for human teams works for AI collaboration.
Wow, psychological safety matters for humans and looks like it matters for agents too. That's amazing. And I loved Carl, when you mentioned, like, from specs, like, as developers now, we have to express intent, and you mentioned not too large, not too sparse. So moving to context then, why does context matter so much? And similar to specs, is there something like too much context or too little context?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, managing context is one of the most important thing to participate to trust, because the context is like what will dictate the output we get. It's like the prompts and all that goes around the prompts. So like in essence, if you give your coding agent too little, it will make things up, right? The agents are trained to respond to your requests, right? Like that's what they do. That's their incentive, and so they will do everything they can to respond. Maybe not always in the manner you want it. And in fact, the other day I was discussing with a colleague who had a pretty simple prompt to something, and with an autonomous agent, and he realized that at the end, the agent had rebuilt an entire authentication system, right? Why? Because the prompt initially didn't require to use the entry libraries or like an authentication library, and so it just rebuilt a system. Like that's absolutely not what we want. So we need to make sure that as we specify, as we prompt, we have enough that we create the good spec and boundaries for what we want. At the same time, if we fill the context too much, then we run multiple risks. One, the agent doesn't have any room to think and acquire knowledge, understand what libraries or what parts of the code it needs to work with. Second, the more context we have, the higher the chance for contradictions, right? Like there may be contradictions between your code base, what you specify in your design document or in your architecture document, etc. And those conflicts, at some point, the coding agent will take an interpretation. So you have to be careful also not to feel too much. So, in order to address these as an industry, we all learned from the issues from the past and came up with techniques for right sizing the prompts and the specs. One aspect that I really advise everybody to look at and use is the combination of Agents.mmd located in the right folders. So of course, one in the root and some in the subfolders, which include the core knowledge, again, not too much, not too little, about that part of the repository, and skills which will complement that with a specific knowledge or actions about, again, parts of the repo or the code base. The main difference between both is that Agents.mmd will be loaded systematically as soon as the coding agent touches a file from that repo or portion of the repo, but skills will be loaded on demand when needed. So, for example, for the repos I work in, I have in Agents.mmd the rules of engagement between me and the coding agent, and the really core principles about the repo. And then my skills very often include the information about some components. So for example, configuration. I have a skill specific for configuration. This is a great thing to put in skills because I rarely need to create new configuration or change the way my code does configuration. But when I do, I want it to be consistent. I want it to use the exact same ways the rest of the code base uses. So a skill is perfect for that because it will be loaded when the coding agent needs that information, and at the same time, it will not be loaded every single time the coding agent needs to do something. And so on this screen that you're showing is another aspect of trust that I use, and Jenny introduced that in terms of like how we create a contract and how we define how we work together. So this is something that I have systematically in the root of my repo in the Agents.mmd root. And that basically defines the relationship between me and the coding agent. And that has changed very significantly the outputs I get from the agent. So as you can see here, it starts at the top with like the roles. I bring the vision, etc., and the coding agent brings like focus, analysis, code base, production of code, etc. And defining that together, we produce like good outcome. And then there's a working agreement, which is, again, as you can see, very short, very specific, where I have the core rules that I want. So we have dealing with uncertainty, trade-offs, disagreement, etc. And as you can see, we talked earlier about creating psychological safety. This is exactly it. It's empowering the LLM to disagree, to argue its point, avoid you're absolutely right on every single response, right? But making sure that it argues its points, and be fine with mistakes. We all make mistakes as humans, and the LLMs make mistakes as well. And I prefer to know when it struggles, when it makes mistakes, rather than it hiding by skipping a test or telling me it's ready for production when it's not, right? And then the last part is the shared values, craftsmanship over completion. It's more important to me to have good quality rather than quantity, because to be honest, it's so fast at producing code that we can restart again and again and again. And I'd rather fix technical debt now than pushing it down the line later. So these aspects really help and have greatly improved how I work with LLMs.
This is really fascinating, the relationship between the developer and the agent, and I know we'll go a lot more into it, but this is amazing. The developer bringing the vision and context, the agent having a clear persona, and the whole working agreement. Like the example you gave, where the agent went way beyond and started implementing authentication itself, where it should have leveraged something else, and it's all part of this working agreement. And I love it that ask rather than assume. So the human can still be in the workflow, and to your earlier point, we can set boundaries also, which is great.
Mm-hmm.
All right, so moving to the third part, managing memory. So how do we manage memory across sessions?
Well, by default, the agents forget the previous context every session. So usually you spend the first 10 minutes rebuilding context that should already exist. And there's 3 general ways to fix this. One is a memory bridge. So at the end of the session, ask the agent to summarize key decisions, context, and any open threads. The next session, you feed that summary back to the agent. It's manual, but it works. Basically, the agent's writing its own onboarding doc. There are memory banks or memory MCPs. This is persistent memory that loads automatically, so you don't have to copy paste. And obviously custom instructions, which Carl just shared, your Agents.mmd, defining how you work together, loaded every time. So the goal is to start every session where you left off, not start from zero.
That's fantastic. Cool. So we talked about improving developer productivity, how the trust aspect comes in, building a relationship, leveraging and factoring agents and various skills, how to manage memory across sessions. So let's move now to teams. And as we said, it's a hybrid team now of developers and agents. And so I'm many of our audience are managers, managing developers. So in this era of agentic DevOps, where teams have both developers and agents, what is the role of a dev manager, and how can the dev manager set conditions, set conditions which will lead to success for her team?
Yeah, I think it's for any manager and also applicable to ICs. But there's a shift that's happening, or I think it's already happened, where individual contributors are now managing agents. So they're giving instructions, reviewing output, deciding what to accept or reject. And that's management work, which means ICs need leadership skills they didn't need before, like clear communication, expectation setting, feedback loops, knowing when to trust and when to verify. For managers, this definitely changes your job. You're not just managing people anymore, you're creating the conditions for human agent collaboration to succeed. And that means teaching your team how to work with AI. It's not just giving them access, but you have to model this behavior yourself, using AI publicly, sharing what works, and most importantly, what doesn't work. Again, building psychological safety so people admit when AI didn't help, instead of pretending everything's fine. In reality, I think the EQ demands on managers just went up, not down. And if your team is at 100% capacity, which I think most are, they won't experiment. You have to create space. And Carl, you're doing some really cool work with your PM team. I'm curious, how do you create space for their experimentation?
Yeah, this is super important. We can't be on the rat wheel all the time, and we need to be able to experiment. I just give them challenges and time for those challenges. Hey, as PMs, I want you to contribute to the product. So let's take this week, and we'll all open PRs that will be reviewed out by our dev teams and get integrated in the product, fixing frictions. As PMs, we all experience that moment where we have these feedback from our users and frictions, and we want to prioritize those, but there's always a higher priority and never gets done, and we're okay, now we can do it ourselves, right? And so being able to create that space for experimentation with our teams is super important.
Yeah, I would say even fundamental at this point. And the next piece would be, don't just add, but integrate. So AI should replace or transform work. It shouldn't be an additional burden. It shouldn't be increasing developer toil. So if it feels like extra work, you're probably doing it wrong. To me, it's like a latte. You don't separate the coffee and the milk. They're mixed together. So you don't want AI as an afterthought. It should be integrated in all that you do. Back to you, Samit.
No, those are great advice. Integrated within the workflow itself. And it's amazing how roles and responsibilities will evolve with agentic AI. Carl talked about PM roles, and out here at Microsoft, we see very high token usage among our PMs. And then Jenny, you mentioned how individual developer are in a way now becoming managers of those agents, and they have to set they have to set that relationship, as within we learn from Agent.mmd and so on. And the EQ need for dev managers really increasing. And I love the aspect of it behooves them to model the behavior and set those conditions for success as a manager. This makes me wonder, as companies and managers, they are measured on the satisfaction of individual developers. Are we soon going to have a condition where managing the satisfaction of agents will also be important? Just joking, yeah.
No, I think so. I mean, I think at Microsoft, we have the biannual employee signals, which is just feedback that usually are given to the managers and the management chain. And I'm sure at some point when you have, agents that hold on to their identity and, are working closely with you, there might be a point where their feedback will be taken into consideration and how well you're working with them. And, like Carl already mentioned, making sure they feel safe to surface issues and bring challenges to you, and aren't just seen as a tool, but actually seen as a partner on your team.
Absolutely. No, that's amazing. We talked about individual developer and then teams. And lastly, how do we scale this success at enterprise level? And it's very important, given all the investments that companies are doing, They just don't want islands of success. They want AI to resonate across the org and create business value across the entire company. Are there what are the canonical examples at Microsoft of things that have been taken at scale?
Yeah, so we have many, but to come back to why we are thinking about it at the enterprise scale. Basically, the main reason is that we have a bunch of toil, right? Like toil is those tasks that everybody has to do, but nobody really wants to do because while they're critical to our products, from a developer perspective, it doesn't feel like it adds, to like something productive and to the value because it's not like feature work, right? On the screen right now we have 3 example scenarios, right? Like the getting to the next version of an authentication SDK, right? Like which developer wants to do that, right? Like fixing security issues or accessibility issues. Like all of these are problems that happen at the company level that like address every single product in the company. And like when we started both addressing these problems at scale and working with AI, we thought, well, like there must be a better way, and there must be a way for us to address those centrally instead of like having each developer in every parts of the company figuring out their own solution, even if AI based, like doesn't make sense for them to think about like their own prompt for these problems. So that's where thinking like from a central place about these problems globally and providing answers is a good thing. So like I said, like the characteristic of these is that they are usually common to the entire enterprise. So when you think about it from an ROI perspective, it makes total sense to spend maybe a little extra time and resources to think about good solutions for these problems. Like you can have a team of 2 or 3 people work on that for a few weeks. If it's going to result in 10,000 or like tens of thousands of PRs across the company to solve the problem at scale, right? So that's like really how we think about it, and like try to make it a no-brainer in terms of ROI to solve these problems. So Jenny will talk a bit more about the Entra in more details, but for accessibility, for example, what we were able to do, it was centrally we built an agent that leverages Playwright to shift left the detection of accessibility issue directly with the developer and help them know and fix these issues before like deploying or getting the software. Whereas before it used to be like they produce their product. Of course, they are trained, but like very often, once the product is done, it goes through an accessibility review with reviewers who check all of these points. And in general, they produce a bunch of bugs then that the developers need to take, fix, etc. It's a long process, takes a lot of energy. Whereas if we can, like with AI, shift left that and make sure these problems are addressed ahead with concrete solutions, like it's a win-win scenario. And the time we spent to devise that solution gets recovered many times in the both productivity but also developer satisfaction of not having to solve these issues after the fact.
Yeah, Carl, you mentioned ROI, and I just want to reinforce something. This is also where developer satisfaction increases. So the work that agents handle at scale, the auth migrations, the security findings, accessibility issues, it's real work, but it's not the work developers want to do. It's toil. It's the stuff that makes people update their LinkedIn. And when agents handle that toil, developers get to focus on the problems they actually care about. So you're not removing agency, you're removing the least interesting work. It's a huge retention and satisfaction lever that doesn't show up in the ROI calculation, but absolutely matters.
That's a great point, Jenny. Developers love to work on new features, customer requests, and so on. But from company's perspective, accessibility, compliance requirements, security depth, they all are non-negotiables. And this is where really agents can do things at scale, not just one or two repos, but across the company repos and across the app estate. It's fantastic because, like, I get this question all the time that, hey, at Microsoft, what kind of scenarios or use cases do you start with at scale? And here are those, like, accessibility, compliance, upgrading to the latest framework. In fact, our Xbox, Quantum, and other teams, they leverage our .NET modernization capabilities of GitHub Copilot and make sure that all the core services are upgraded to the latest .NET framework. And in doing so, Jenny mentioned ROI, and they are reducing the time by 88%, but also importantly improving developer satisfaction. So that's fantastic. So, Jenny, like, are there some best practices that we can share across all of these scale projects?
Yeah, we've come up with, I think, 3 best practices that we've seen for scaling across the enterprise. So one is creating specialized agents or agent skills. So not one agent doing everything, but specialized agents or agent skills doing specific tasks very well. For example, an SRE agent handling incidents, a coding agent handling migrations, a code review agent reviewing code. It could have an agent skill checking tests. Each agent is an expert at one thing or has access to specialized skills. The second part is adopt the partnership framework at the org level. The same principles that we've already talked about that work one-on-one, psychological safety, clear working agreements, shared values, need to be encoded into how your organization builds and deploys agents. And the interesting thing about AI-assisted development, agents create more work. That's the point. But if your verification process was designed for human speed output, you just moved the bottleneck. We're using the same agent pattern for verification. So SRE agents that analyze telemetry and flag anomalies, agents that check whether test coverage actually exercises the code paths that changed, agents that verify the patterns in a PR match the patterns in your skills. Creation scales with agents, and verification has to scale the same way, or it becomes the new constraint.
Those are great points, Jenny. And I know our dev audience, they love to see demos rather than just being told. Can we have a demo of how these agents and skills come together for this scale problems?
Definitely. We can switch over to my screen and I'll share a quick demo. So this is my Aspire web app. You'll notice that I can go to weather, which calls a backend API and displays the result, but really anyone can access it. This API is not protected, and we're going to ask Copilot to fix it. So I'm just going to close these, and we'll restart them later. So I'm in VS Code. I will paste my prompt. And while this is working, we'll take a few minutes. So I'm just going to talk through and give some context. So at Microsoft Ignite in 2025, I showed what AI partnership looks like in practice, our intra SDK V1 to V2 migration project, touching hundreds of repositories across Microsoft's infrastructure. Work that used to take 4 to 6 weeks per repository was now completed in under 2 hours with 80 to 90% accuracy with the coding agent. And after that session, the most common question I got from developers wasn't about our technical architecture. It was simpler. Can I see the prompt? People wanted something tangible. They were tired of polished demos with fake code. They wanted something real, something practical, something they could apply to their own work. So this demo is a step in that direction. We'll share the agent skills used, and you can try it yourself today. For developers without identity experience, setting up a new app registration takes days or even weeks. What if you could package the expertise of someone who's done this hundreds of times? And that's what we've done. So we have 2 agent skills. I will slide this over. And you might wonder, what are agent skills? Carl touched on it a bit, but think of agent skills like this. AI agents are generalists by default. Agent skills let them learn specialized expertise on demand. It's like giving an AI a cheat sheet or a how-to guide for specific tasks. So you're a smart person, you can do many things okay, but when you need to do something specific, like file taxes or fix a car, or maybe make a certain type of dessert, you'd benefit from a step-by-step guide or a recipe written by an expert. And agent skills are those guides, but for AI. So instead of AI being pretty good at everything, expert at nothing, skills let agents become genuinely capable at specific tasks, consistently, reliably, and in ways that can be audited. So we'll take a look at the first skill. This skill adds intra-ID authentication code to the web app and the web API. And you can see the checklist here on the screen, which gives the agent kind of a verification list. We also provided some C# code, which the agent will need for the intra-ID auth, and it will copy paste this code into my Aspire project. And let's take a look. I haven't been following it on the side, but we'll see where it's at. If I go to program.cs, we'll start with the web API. So in program.cs, you can see it's already added the JWT bearer authentication. If I scroll down a bit, it's added require authorization. This is the secret line here that's very important. If I go to the app settings, it's already set up for intra-ID. It has the settings that are needed. They're just placeholders right now because skill number 2 will actually provision the app with intra-ID. So for now, it's just placeholders. And we'll go to the web app. You can see it's added OpenID Connect authentication. It's letting me call a downstream protected API and setting up a token cache. And here on line 34, it's adding the message handler. And this is important. This is going to make sure that the right token is added on the right request to the downstream API. And we'll go to the app settings. I'll just say yes on that. You can see, again, just placeholder values, but it's all set up, including the scopes. So once it does skill number 2, it will start putting in the information that it has from intra-ID. And under components, we go to the weather page. It's handling the incremental consent and MFA. So there's a try-catch that's needed here so that if you have conditional access or MFA applied, you'll have a nice user experience with that. Okay, so let's see how we're doing. Says phase 1 is complete. So that's great. And now we're moving on to phase 2, provisioning. So it's going to create the app registrations in my tenant. And that's using the second skill, which is this app provisioning skill. And this skill does the app registration creation. So as the web API is created, the app ID URI is created, the scopes are exposed, the service principal is created. All those tedious portal clicks that you had to do before is now done in seconds. Once it moves to the web app, it will create the right redirect URI. It automatically requests the right API permission, and then it adds all the required application parameters back in the code configuration. So in a real org, this might go through a workflow, but the skill can adapt. You can change it to meet your workflow and what you need. And you can see here, I think right here for secrets. So the secrets are stored in user secrets, never in source control. So the skill even enforces the best practices. And let's see how we're doing. We can go to the app settings, and these will reload here once everything is set up. So it has all the values, it's updating the files, storing the secret. And then we will run it again and see if we can, how we sign in. Always fun to do a live demo. But
yeah, but it's amazing
so
to
far,
see
it's not bad.
it's amazing to see how the agent skills come together.
And I asked Copilot research how long this would take a non-identity expert to do all of this. And it said about 12 to 18 documentation links would be needed. So going deep into Microsoft Learn documentation, also Aspire documentation. And I find when I first joined Microsoft 9 years ago, registering applications and doing all of this would take at least a week, if not more. It's very tedious. So the fact that we can do it in a few minutes and a demo is amazing. So you can see I've got my web API registered now. This is good to go. If I go down to my web app, I have the settings for my web app here. I also have the scope that's for my web API. So this is ready to go. And now I just need the new dashboard link, which Copilot will provide to me once he's done building. So in phase 1, he did build the code, and then we didn't run it because it won't run with just the placeholder values. But now we can build and run the code, and we'll go back to the Aspire dashboard and see what. Take a look. It's coming.
This is amazing, and especially when you mentioned, like, the cognitive load on a developer going through those 12 or 13 different documentation stuff just to learn all this, and instead you have this skill.
Mm-hmm. 2 skills, but yeah.
Yeah, exactly.
2 skills because they're different. So one is just adding the intra ID code that's needed for auth, and the second is actually what I think is more work, which is actually provisioning the app with intra ID. So I'm going to load the same Aspire project from before. Let me just try again. Just open in a new tab. There we go. And you can see now I actually have a login button at the top, which I didn't have before, but I'm not going to click that. I'm actually going to go directly to the weather forecast. And now I should be prompted to sign in. It should be protected. I shouldn't see the backend data. Okay, so now I'm signing in with the user from my tenant, doing consent. And one more time. Oops. Awesome. So now I've got the backend data. My web API is protected. That took just a few minutes. I wasn't actually keeping track, but just a few minutes. You can see I have my signed in user at the top and a logout button. And now instead of having unprotected API, it's now protected. So we can go back to the slides.
This is amazing, Jenny. And earlier Carl had mentioned, Copilot implemented its own authentication and so on, and clearly we don't need that. But using this skill, you save developer toil, all the cognitive overload on the devs, and we can really scale across the entire company. So that's amazing.
Yeah, if you've ever tried to do that yourself, you'll understand how amazing it is to see it all live and it worked. We had a tool that did this, but having the agent be able to make decisions and not have everything in the exact file where the tool is looking really gave us a lot of flexibility. So with that, you saw one agent working with 2 skills, one adding intra ID code for authentication and the other skill provisioning the apps and intra ID. And so now we're going to look at how do we do this same pattern, but at scale across Microsoft. So internally, we're using the same approach. Oh, we can go back to the slides. Sorry about that. We're using the same approach, though. So we have one coding agent with 13 specialized skills covering every web framework and intra SDK combination. That's around 90,000 services at Microsoft. Should I wait for the thing to switch over? Or I'll keep talking. I can keep talking. Anyway, but we didn't start there. When we started, we did what most teams do. We tried to automate detailed instructions, checklist, documented every edge case. It failed repeatedly, not because AI wasn't capable, but because we were asking it to be a script executor in a domain that required judgment. And authentication requires judgment calls. You can't automate judgment. So the breakthrough came when we stopped giving AI a task list and started giving it a role. Identity, mission, permission to use judgment, and safety to say, I don't know. And Carl, I think this is what shifted your interactions to this relationship piece.
Yeah, absolutely. Before I would get, this is done and ready to go to prod when it obviously wasn't. And now very the kind of output I get is the key challenges that it faced, the key decisions it had to make along the way. So not only I get the coding agent to tell me the issues it has, but also the decisions it had to make along the way, which is critical because you may or may not agree with decision points that it made, and that's a super important aspect, so that you can trust what it's been doing.
Yeah, exactly right. There's one other thing that surprised us, which was escalation guidance, which ties into what Carl's referring to also, which is we explicitly gave the agent permission to say, I don't know. And then suddenly it did constantly, surfacing edge cases we never documented, asking clarifying questions instead of guessing. And at first that felt like failure. Like, why is it asking so many questions? But those questions were exactly the judgment calls a developer would make. The agent was doing what we actually wanted. It was collaborating instead of executing blindly. And I think if you take just one thing, give your agents that permission to escalate and to ask for help, it will really change everything.
This is a great framework for co-creative partnership. And I love the theme of human agent relationship and how rather than just using them as automation tools, we there's this building this collaborative problem solving relationship. And I also love this aspect of escalation guidance, which is just like with humans, just don't go ahead and assume things and do it. There are at times if you don't know, just say it, and that's perfectly fine. And setting those kind of boundaries so that humans can still remain in control. That's amazing. So what are the overall learnings, Jenny, and how did you adapt it? This is a fascinating story.
Well, Carl, I already know the answer to this, but have you ever spent more time fixing the agent's work than if you'd just done it yourself?
Yeah, especially at the beginning. I remember early 2025, the biggest frustration I had is what I call bad loops, where you have a bug and the LLM would constantly put band-aid over band-aid over band-aid, making the code 10 times worse than it already was. And yeah, this was a massive waste of time. And to be honest, at the time, almost made me stop it. I'm glad I persevered, but yeah, definitely.
Yeah, I remember in the early days, I would have to commit each iteration with Copilot because sometimes it would go off the rails and then it was impossible to get back to a good working state, or you would just have to kill VS or VS Code and just do a new git clean, start over. But a few lessons that we've learned from what didn't work. One is being too prescriptive, and it's a really easy trap to fall into. But when you put too many guardrails, there's no room for creativity. The agent really struggles. It's like micromanaging a person. It's not an optimal work environment. Another pitfall is using AI where a tool would do. So just because everyone says use AI doesn't mean you use it everywhere. You can use AI to write the tool, but keep AI for where judgment and nuance matter, and use tools where tools are best. Another one where I talked about a little bit earlier was giving one agent too much. Carl mentioned this also at the very beginning, especially with coding agents. Smaller, well-defined tasks work better. Hand off to another agent instead of overloading one, or you can use agent skills. And I think the big one is just poor output is usually a sign of poor relationship. So if your agent keeps failing, look at the interaction, not just the prompt. Carl, anything to add to the list?
No, I think you got it all.
I love it, Jenny. It's almost like devs and dev managers having to take accountability for the agents. Poor output of the agent is a sign of a poor relationship with the agent. I can see us creating t-shirts and distributing that as swags at our events.
I would love that. At least a sticker.
A sticker, yeah. No, that's awesome. Yeah. So this was awesome. We covered individual developer productivity, we covered team effectiveness, and then finally we covered all the best practices to scale across the entire enterprise. So as we come to our wrap up and final thoughts, what's the most obvious learning and insight as you reflect back?
Well, I think for me, looking back, I would say you really have to show initiative, like try things, experiment, take note of the small changes, and really grow that individual relationship with AI first. The 10x productivity that everyone talks about, it comes after you've built that relationship, not before. Carl, what do you think?
Yeah, I agree. There's the relationship aspect and just the experience, right? Like you need to put in the work and get a feel for the responses, the limitations. Especially limitations is something that I openly discuss with the LLM. I have my own limitations. I have sometimes my monkey brain that tries to do everything all at once, or gets forgetful and things like that. And at the same time, I clearly understand the limitations of the LLM. So getting a feel of that and putting in the work to figuring that out is super important.
That's great. Yeah. Sharing vulnerability. So if you were to do it all over again, how would that change? What would?
So on my side, it's going to be super cliche, but to be honest, I would have started earlier.
How about you, Jenny?
That seems almost impossible because I remember the early time. I mean, yeah, I was just very frustrated. I agree with you, Carl. I'm glad I didn't give up. I think a lot of people did. And it's time to jump back in. I think if you were one of those early ones that just found it too frustrating. But I think if I could do it all over again, I don't know if I would change much, but I think I would focus really on the relationship that you build with AI. So how you collaborate, how you communicate, how you work together, because that sustains across tooling and models. It's a very fast-moving space. There's something new, definitely weekly, almost daily. And so I think the skill to invest in is actually in the relationship, your communication skills, and how you collaborate and provide clarity.
That's a great lesson. And there's this underlying theme then of perseverance also. Like any new technology, like any big change management project, there's some learning curve which we have to go through, and that might be frustrating, but rest assured, the returns will be there, the ROI will be there, and it will be great. So that's one theme for our audience. Persevere. Initially the ramp up time might be frustrating, but hang on. All right, so that was backward looking, but if we do forward looking, I know both of you have crystal balls. So what are you predicting over the next 12 to 18 months?
Oh, I don't like to do predictions too much. I feel like everyone who does a prediction, it ends up not coming true, and it's usually just anyway. But I think we've already passed the Turing test, but we seem to just keep moving the goalposts. So I think at some point we'll stop debating whether AGI is here and start asking what kind of relationship do we want with it. And the teams and companies that figure out how to make room for a new intelligence, not control it, but genuinely collaborate with it, they're the ones who will thrive. And Carl, I'm curious what your thoughts are on this one.
Yeah, on my side, more practically on the models. So when I look at the trajectory of models in 2025, and especially in the ones I was using for coding earlier in the year, and where we are at today with Opus 4.5 or ChatGPT 5.2, I can only imagine what's going to be happening in 2026, right? Like when you see that progression and where I was with the struggles earlier in the year and how far we've come, even if we have just a linear progress on the models in the next year, we'll be at a point, I think, where if we have the right framework and guardrails in place, and we have our DevOps figured out to be truly agentic, then I think we'll be able to produce large portions of software quite autonomously by the end of the year.
That's awesome. So on that optimistic note, for our audience, we have three URLs for you to get started. We have the Ignite session that Jenny had mentioned earlier, along with our CVP Amanda Silver. We have this blog on human AI relationship that Jenny has. Please check that out. And then we demoed the 2 skills, so you can learn more about those Entra ID skills for agents. And finally, from logistics perspective, just a reminder, this is part of our Agentic DevOps Reactor series. So we are, of course, in the second session, February 3. Next week, we'll have another amazing session on accelerating your developer workflow from idea to delivery. With that, I'll hand it back. Larissa, any final?
Thank you all for joining, and thanks again to our speakers. We're always looking to improve our sessions and your experience. If you have any feedback for us, we would love to hear what you have to say. You can find our survey link on the screen or in the chat, and we'll see you at the next one.